The stars stretched endlessly beyond the bridge windows of the UESS Indomitable as it cruised through the Kepler expanse. Captain Elena Vasquez stood with her hands clasped behind her back, watching the navigation display with practiced calm. Her ship was 3 days into a routine patrol mission, checking the outer boundaries of human territory for any threats or anomalies. The crew worked quietly at their stations, the soft beeping of instruments creating a familiar rhythm. The Indomitable was one of humanity's newest destroyer-class warships, sleek and efficient. To any outside observer, it looked like a standard military vessel, nothing particularly special or threatening. That was exactly how humanity designed their ships. After centuries of warfare on Earth, humans had learned a valuable lesson. Never show your enemy everything you have. Lieutenant Chen looked up from his sensor station, his expression shifting from boredom to alert attention. "Captain, I'm detecting an unknown vessel approaching from Sector 7. They're not broadcasting any identification signals." Elena moved to his station, her eyes scanning the readouts. The unknown ship was large, roughly twice the size of the Indomitable, with energy signatures that looked advanced. "Hail them using standard first contact protocols. Let's be friendly." The communications officer sent out greetings in 12 different languages, along with mathematical sequences that any spacefaring civilization would recognize. For several minutes there was only silence. Then the screen flickered to life. The alien that appeared was tall and angular with dark blue skin and 3 eyes arranged in a triangle pattern on its face. Its expression, if Elena was reading it correctly, seemed contemptuous. The universal translator kicked in after a moment, turning the alien's harsh clicking sounds into words. "You are in space claimed by the Zethkar hegemony. Identify your vessel and prepare for inspection." Elena kept her voice steady and professional. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the United Earth spaceship Indomitable. We are on a peaceful patrol mission in recognized human territory. According to our star charts, this region is neutral space. We mean no harm and request peaceful dialogue." The Zethkar commander's 3 eyes narrowed. "Your charts are irrelevant. We will now scan your vessel to determine if you pose a threat to our interests." Before Elena could respond, her tactical officer shouted a warning.
"Captain?"
"They're hitting us with a deep penetration scan. It's going through our hull, mapping our systems." Elena felt her jaw tighten. A deep scan was one of the worst violations in interstellar protocol. It was like having someone point a loaded gun at your face while going through your pockets. It was an act of aggression, pure and simple. "Raise shields. Communications, tell them to cease their scan immediately. That's a violation of our sovereignty." The Zethkar commander made a sound that the translator interpreted as laughter. "Your primitive shields cannot stop our technology. We will take whatever information we wish." The scan continued for another 30 seconds before finally stopping. The alien studied something off-screen, then looked back at Elena with obvious amusement. "Your vessel is crude and outdated. Your weapons are kinetic projectiles. How quaint. You use chemical propulsion for your missiles. We have not seen such primitive technology in centuries." Elena's hands clenched into fists behind her back, but her face remained calm. "Our technology serves our needs. Now I must insist on an apology for your unauthorized scan, and a guarantee that you will delete any data you collected. What you did is considered an act of war among civilized species." The Zethkar commander's amusement seemed to grow. "War? You dare speak of war? You are children playing with toys in the darkness of space. The Zethkar hegemony has conquered 100 worlds. Your entire species is barely worth our attention." He leaned forward, his 3 eyes gleaming. "However, since you are so concerned with your sovereignty, perhaps a lesson is in order. Submit to immediate inspection. Transmit all your technical specifications. Allow us to board your vessel. Do this and we will allow you to leave." Elena felt the anger rising in her chest, but she forced it down. She had studied first contact scenarios at the academy. Sometimes civilizations tested newcomers to see how they would react. "I cannot and will not comply with those demands. We have done nothing to threaten you. Stand down and allow us to depart in peace." The Zethkar commander's expression shifted to something cold and dangerous. "Then you will learn respect through pain." The Zethkar vessel opened fire without another word. Energy beams lanced through space, slamming into the Indomitable's shields. The bridge rocked violently and warning klaxons began to wail. Elena grabbed the railing to steady herself. "Return fire. All weapons." The Indomitable's railgun spun up and launched a barrage of tungsten rounds at near relativistic speeds. The Zethkar ship's shields absorbed most of the impacts, but Elena could see their energy readings fluctuate. Good. They weren't invincible, but the Zethkar ship was bigger and had more firepower. Another volley of energy beams struck the Indomitable, and this time the shields buckled. Hull plating vaporized in sections 3 and 7. Damage reports flooded in from all over the ship. Hull breaches on decks 4 and 5. Shield generators are at 30%. Her tactical officer shouted over the alarms. Elena made her decision instantly. They were outgunned and there was no backup within range. Pride wouldn't save her crew. Helm plot a jump to hyperspace. Get us out of here now. Coordinates locked, Captain. Jump. Space twisted around the Indomitable as its hyperspace drive engaged. In an instant, the ship vanished from normal space, leaving the Zethkar vessel alone in the void. On the Zethkar bridge, the commander laughed again. Cowards, as expected. Send a report to the High Council. We have encountered a new species called humans. They are weak and easily frightened. They pose no threat to the hegemony. The communication officer bowed. As you command, War Commander. The Zethkar ship turned and began its journey back to their territory, completely unaware of what they had just started. They had scanned a human warship, attacked without provocation, and humiliated humanity's representatives. In the coming weeks, they would learn that humanity remembered every slight, every insult, every drop of blood spilled. They had made a very big mistake. The message from the Indomitable reached Earth 3 days after the incident. Fleet Admiral Marcus Chen sat in the command center beneath Geneva, reading Captain Vasquez's report for the 3rd time. Around him, holographic displays showed the positions of every human vessel in known space, along with real-time data feeds from colonies, stations, and outposts. The room hummed with quiet activity as officers monitored humanity's presence across a dozen star systems. Marcus was 63 years old, with gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too many conflicts. He had served in the resource wars on Earth, fought pirates in the asteroid belt, and commanded the defense of New Melbourne when raiders attacked. He understood violence and those who practiced it. As he read about the Zethkar's contemptuous attack, he felt something cold settle in his stomach. Opinion, Colonel Park? He asked his intelligence officer. Colonel Sarah Park pulled up additional screens, showing what little information they had about the Zethkar hegemony. They're a regional power, sir. They control about 30 star systems, mostly through intimidation and superior technology. Other species consider them arrogant but dangerous. They have fought 3 wars in the past century, and won all of them decisively. She paused. They have never encountered humans before. Based on their behavior pattern, they test new species through provocation. If the species submits, they become tributaries. If they fight back weakly, they get conquered. Marcus nodded slowly. And if they fight back effectively? Unknown, sir. Most species in this region don't have the military capacity to seriously threaten the hegemony. Park's expression was grim. The Zethkar likely think we're another minor power they can bully. Send a formal diplomatic message through the standard channels, Marcus ordered. We demand an immediate apology, full reparations for the damage to the Indomitable, and a guarantee of no further aggression. Make it polite but firm. Let's see how they respond. The diplomatic message was transmitted within the hour. It took 4 days to receive a response. When it came, Marcus read it with growing anger that he carefully kept off his face. The Zethkar ambassador's message was brief and insulting. Humanity was referred to as soft pink creatures who crawled from their muddy planet. The attack on the Indomitable was described as a necessary education and proper respect. The message concluded with a threat. Humanity had 10 days to transmit detailed specifications of all their military vessels and technology, or the Zethkar would send a fleet to extract the information by force. Marcus called an emergency meeting of the United Earth Space Command Council. 23 high-ranking officers appeared as holograms around the table, their faces showing various degrees of shock and anger as they reviewed the Zethkar message. Thoughts? Marcus asked calmly. General Torres from the Marine Corps spoke first, her voice tight with controlled fury. They attacked our ship without cause, insulted our entire species, and now they're making demands? Admiral, we cannot let this stand. If we show weakness now, every 2-bit empire in this region will think they can push us around. Admiral Washington from the Colonial Defense Fleet nodded agreement. More than that, If we submit to their demands and give them our technical data, we compromise every defensive advantage we have. It would be strategic suicide. Playing devil's advocate, Colonel Park interjected. We don't know their full military capacity. They could have thousands of ships. Are we prepared to fight a war against a technologically advanced empire? Marcus leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him. That's exactly what they expect us to think. They scanned the Indomitable. They saw our kinetic weapons, our chemical rockets, our relatively simple shield generators. They think we're primitive. A slight smile crossed his face. They don't understand that human ships are designed with a specific philosophy. We don't advertise our capabilities. We compartmentalize our systems. We hide our best technology behind layers of basic equipment. He pulled up a schematic of the Indomitable. When they scanned Captain Vasquez's ship, they saw a destroyer with railguns and missile tubes. What they didn't see were the experimental energy weapons still in testing phases. They didn't detect the quantum encrypted communication systems. They couldn't penetrate the isolated computer cores that control our most advanced offensive capabilities. They saw what we wanted potential enemies to see. Understanding dawned on several faces around the table. General Torres grinned. You're saying we let them underestimate us? Not just them. Everyone, Marcus confirmed. When we first ventured into space a century ago, we studied every military conflict in human history. We learned that the side that gets underestimated often has a significant advantage, so we built our ships to look less threatening than they actually are. We designed them to be dismissed by arrogant opponents. He stood up, placing his hands on the table. The Zethkar think they know what we are. They're about to learn they're wrong. What are your orders, Admiral? General Torres asked. Marcus's expression hardened. We prepare for war. Begin Protocol Omega immediately. I want every reserve fleet activated. Every shipyard goes to maximum production. Every colony needs to prepare defensive positions. We're going to mobilize like we've never mobilized before. Over the next week, humanity transformed. Civilian freighters that had been hauling cargo between planets suddenly altered their routes, heading to military staging areas. Construction stations that had been building habitats and mining ships retooled their assembly lines for warships. Training facilities that had been processing a steady stream of recruits went to 24-hour operation. On Earth, the factories that had been dormant since the last major conflict came roaring back to life. Humans had built their industrial capacity with warfare in mind, maintaining the ability to switch from peace to war production almost overnight. It was a lesson learned from the 20th century, when the outcome of conflicts was determined by who could build weapons faster. Meanwhile, a Zethkar intelligence analyst named Kirathon sat in her office on their homeworld, studying the data from the Indomitable's scan. Something bothered her about the human ship. The technology seemed primitive on the surface, but there were gaps in the data, sections of the vessel that their scan hadn't penetrated. That shouldn't have been possible unless the humans had sophisticated counter-scanning technology. Curious, she began researching this species called humanity. What she found disturbed her deeply. Humans had been spacefaring for only 130 years, but they had been fighting each other for thousands of years before that. Their history was an endless cycle of conflicts, innovations in warfare, brief periods of peace, and then more conflicts. They had gone from throwing rocks to splitting atoms in less than 10,000 years. They had nearly destroyed their own planet multiple times with weapons of terrifying power. Kirathon wrote an urgent report to the High Council, warning them that humanity might be more dangerous than they appeared. Her report was filed and ignored. The Zethkar had never lost to an inferior species, and they weren't about to start worrying about creatures who still used bullets and explosives. On the 10th day, the Zethkar received humanity's response to their ultimatum. Admiral Marcus Chen's face filled their screens, his expression hard as stone. The United Earth Space Command does not negotiate with bullies, and we do not submit to threats. You attacked our vessel without provocation. You insulted our people. You demanded our surrender. We reject your ultimatum completely. If you want war, you'll get war. But be warned, you have no idea what you're provoking. The transmission ended. The Zethkar High Council met in emergency session. After 3 hours of debate, they reached a decision. War Commander Thelzaris would lead a punitive fleet of 47 warships to human space. They would strike a border colony as an example, destroy any human military vessels they encountered, and force humanity to submit. It would be quick, decisive, and overwhelming. 47 Zethkar warships jumped to hyperspace, heading toward human territory. They expected easy victory. They were about to learn why humans had a saying, "Never start a war you're not prepared to finish." Nova Station hung in space like a small city, its modular sections gleaming under the light of a nearby orange dwarf star. It was primarily a trading outpost, where merchants from various species exchanged goods and information. Roughly 8,000 people called it home, most of them civilian traders, families, and support staff. A small defense garrison of 200 Marines kept the peace and maintained security. Admiral Marcus Chen studied the tactical display, showing Nova Station and its surroundings. Intelligence reports confirmed that the Zethkar fleet was heading directly toward it. 47 warships against one station and whatever human forces happened to be nearby. The Zethkar clearly intended to make an example, to show the galaxy what happened when someone defied them. Captain Elena Vasquez stood beside him on the bridge of the carrier vessel Eisenhower. The Indomitable was still at Nova Station, its repairs incomplete. "Admiral, we should evacuate the station and pull back to a more defensible position. We can't hold Nova against that many enemy ships." Marcus smiled slightly. "That's exactly what they expect us to do, Captain. And we will evacuate the civilians. But we're not pulling back. We're going to give the Zethkar exactly what they want. A seemingly easy target. Then we're going to teach them a lesson they'll never forget." Over the next 2 days, civilian transports began evacuating Nova Station. Freighters carried away families, merchants, and non-essential personnel. To any observer, it looked like humanity was abandoning the station in panic. The evacuation was deliberate, obvious, and seemingly desperate. Perfect. What the observers didn't see was the 300 Marines who stayed behind, taking up positions throughout the station with heavy weapons and demolition charges. They didn't see the cargo containers being moved to strategic locations, each one filled with missile launchers and railgun batteries. They didn't see the technicians rewiring power systems and activating hidden weapon arrays that had been built into the station structure. From the very beginning, in the asteroid field surrounding Nova Station, mining ships worked slowly, moving between rocks as if continuing their normal operations. These weren't normal mining ships. They were military vessels disguised as civilian craft, each one equipped with torpedo tubes and missile batteries hidden behind false hull plating. They positioned themselves carefully, using the asteroids for cover. The Indomitable sat docked at Nova Station, looking damaged and vulnerable. It had a visible hull breach on its port side, and several of its weapon systems appeared offline. What wasn't visible was the full combat crew aboard, the repaired systems hidden behind damaged plating, and the experimental weapons that the Zethkar scan had never detected. 4 more ships joined the Indomitable over the next day. They were destroyers and frigates, smaller vessels that appeared to be Nova Station's entire defensive force. To the Zethkar, it would look like humanity had scraped together every available ship to defend one station. It would look desperate and inadequate. The Eisenhower and the rest of Admiral Chen's actual fleet waited 10 light hours away, their positions carefully concealed by the system's natural interference. 20 warships, including 3 carriers, 5 battlecruisers, and 12 destroyers. All of them were on standby, ready to jump the moment Admiral Chen gave the order. War Commander Thelzaris felt satisfaction as his fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Nova Station system. His sensors immediately detected the human station and the pathetic defensive force arrayed around it. 5 human vessels, all of them small. The station itself appeared to be in the process of evacuation, with civilian ships fleeing like frightened prey. "The humans know they cannot win," his tactical officer observed. "They flee before we even arrive," Thelzaris nodded. "As expected, open a channel to their station. Let us offer them one final chance to surrender." The communication request went out. A human officer appeared on screen, a woman with captain's insignia. She looked tired and stressed. Thelzaris recognized her from the intelligence files as Captain Vasquez, the commander of the vessel they had disciplined earlier. "Captain Vasquez," Thelzaris said, his tone magnanimous. "I am War Commander Thelzaris of the Zethkar hegemony. Your species has been given every opportunity to submit peacefully. You have chosen defiance. I will give you one final chance. Surrender your station, your vessels, and all military data. Do this and your lives will be spared." Elena Vasquez stared at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. "War Commander, I'm going to tell you something important. You scanned my ship. You thought you understood what you saw. You attacked us. You threatened our people. And now you've come here thinking you'll have an easy victory." Her smile widened. "You have no idea how badly you've miscalculated." Thelzaris' three eyes narrowed. "You have 30 seconds to surrender, or we will destroy your station and every ship defending it." "Come and try," Elena said, and cut the transmission. Thelzaris gave the order to advance. His fleet moved forward in a standard battle formation, shields at maximum, weapons charged. This would be over quickly. The human ships opened fire first, their primitive railguns and missiles launching toward the Zethkar fleet. Thelzaris almost laughed. The projectiles were slow and easily tracked. His shields would absorb them without difficulty. The first railgun rounds hit his lead ships and the shields held as expected. But then something strange happened. The kinetic impacts didn't dissipate like energy weapons. They transferred their momentum directly to the ship's hulls, making them shudder and rock. More rounds followed, concentrating fire on single targets. One destroyer's shields flickered and failed under the sustained bombardment, and then tungsten penetrators were punching through its hull plating. "Return fire," Thelzaris ordered. "All vessels target their warships." The Zethkar fleet unleashed their energy weapons, brilliant beams of destructive power that lanced through space. They struck the human ships and shields flared and failed. But the human vessels didn't die quickly. Even with shields down, they kept fighting. Their hulls were layered with armor that absorbed and dispersed energy. Systems that should have been destroyed continued functioning because humans built redundancy into every critical component. The Indomitable took direct hits that should have vaporized it. Instead, it lost external plating and a few weapon mounts but kept firing. A missile struck its bridge, and for a moment Thelzaris thought it was finished. Then secondary command systems kicked in, and the vessel continued its attack as if nothing had happened. "What is wrong with these ships?" his tactical officer shouted. "They should be dead." Then the trap sprang completely. The civilian freighters in the area suddenly dropped their camouflage fields. They weren't freighters at all. They were military carriers, and they began launching fighter craft by the dozens. Small, agile vessels that swarmed toward the Zethkar fleet like angry insects. The asteroids in the belt activated. What Thelzaris had assumed were natural rock formations were actually disguised weapons platforms. Missile tubes opened in the hollowed-out asteroids, and hundreds of missiles launched simultaneously, filling space with contrails. Nova Station itself transformed. Hidden panels slid aside, revealing railgun batteries, missile launchers, and energy weapons that no scan had detected. The station had been built as a fortress disguised as a trading post, and now it showed its true nature. And then Admiral Chen's fleet arrived. 20 human warships dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation, catching the Zethkar fleet in a crossfire. The Eisenhower immediately launched its full complement of fighters and bombers, adding to the chaos. The space around Nova Station became a furious battle. The Zethkar, who had expected an easy fight against scattered defenders, found themselves surrounded, outnumbered, and facing an enemy that fought with terrifying efficiency. Human ships coordinated their attacks with precision, focusing fire to overwhelm shields and then destroying ships systematically. Thelzaris watched in growing horror as his fleet was torn apart. His vessels were individually superior to most human ships, but humans fought differently than any enemy he had encountered. They didn't retreat when damaged. They didn't panic when outgunned. They just kept coming, kept firing, kept fighting with a determination that seemed almost insane. A human fighter, its hull scarred and smoking, rammed directly into a Zethkar cruiser after its weapons were destroyed. The resulting explosion took out the cruiser's engine section. Thelzaris couldn't understand it. Why would a pilot sacrifice themselves like that? His own flagship shuddered as multiple railgun rounds penetrated its shields. Warning lights flared across his command console. "Shields at 20%. Hull breaches on multiple decks. All ships retreat," Thelzaris ordered, his voice no longer confident. "Jump to hyperspace immediately." But many of his vessels couldn't. Their hyperspace drives had been specifically targeted and disabled. Human tactics weren't random. They were surgical and brutal. Ships that could escape did so. Ships that couldn't were destroyed. When the battle ended 2 hours later, only 12 Zethkar vessels limped back to their territory. 35 warships had been destroyed or captured. War Commander Thelzaris was not among the survivors. His flagship had been boarded by human marines who fought through his ship room by room until they reached the bridge. They took him prisoner along with his surviving crew. In the aftermath, Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the Eisenhower, looking at the damage report. 3 human ships destroyed, 7 heavily damaged, but Nova Station still stood, and they had won decisively. Captain Vasquez appeared on the communication screen, grinning despite the exhaustion on her face. "Good work, Captain," Marcus said. "How's your ship?" "The Indomitable has seen better days, but she'll fly again," Elena replied. "Admiral, they never had a chance, did they? This was planned from the start." Marcus nodded slowly. "They made assumptions based on incomplete information. They thought scanning one ship told them everything about humanity. They forgot the first rule of warfare: never underestimate your enemy." He looked at the tactical display showing the fleeing Zethkar vessels. "They're running home now to tell their leaders what happened. And that's when the real war begins." The Zethkar High Council chamber fell into shocked silence as the surviving fleet commanders finished their reports. 35 warships lost, an entire fleet defeated by a species they had dismissed as primitive. The recordings from the battle showed scenes that the council members could barely comprehend. Human ships fighting long after they should have been destroyed, weapons platforms hidden in asteroids, and a level of tactical coordination that spoke of military sophistication far beyond what their initial scans had suggested. High Counselor Vextharn was the first to speak, his 3 eyes burning with rage. "This is unacceptable. These humans have humiliated the hegemony. They have destroyed our ships and taken prisoners. We must respond with overwhelming force. If we do not, every species in this region will think they can defy us." The other council members voiced their agreement. Within hours, they had made their decision. The Zethkar hegemony would mobilize its full military strength. Over 2,000 warships would be assembled and sent to human space. They would attack multiple human colonies simultaneously, overwhelming them through sheer numerical superiority. Humanity would be crushed completely. The mobilization began immediately. Ships were pulled from garrison duties, patrol routes, and border stations. The hegemony's entire military might was being directed toward one goal: the complete defeat of humanity. It was the largest military operation the Zethkar had undertaken in a century. Kirathon, the intelligence analyst who had warned about underestimating humanity, watched the preparations with growing dread. She reviewed the battle recordings from Nova Station again and again, trying to understand what she was seeing. The human tactics were brilliant, but more than that, they were adaptable. The humans had anticipated the Zethkar response and prepared accordingly. She pulled up information about Earth's history and spent days reading through translated documents. What she found horrified her. Humans had been fighting organized warfare for thousands of years. They had developed concepts like strategic depth, guerrilla warfare, total war, and mutually assured destruction. They had fought conflicts that killed millions of their own people and kept fighting. They had a saying she found particularly chilling: "War is hell, but we're good at it." Kirathon wrote another report, this one more urgent than the last. She warned that the hegemony was making a fundamental mistake. Humans didn't fight like other species. They didn't surrender when outmatched. They adapted, improvised, and found ways to win against superior forces. The report was again ignored. The High Council was too committed to their course of action to consider alternative viewpoints. 3 weeks later, the Zethkar invasion began. 2,000 warships dropped out of hyperspace at 6 different human colony systems simultaneously. The attacks were coordinated and overwhelming. Human defensive fleets in those systems fought bravely but were vastly outnumbered. Within days, the Zethkar had occupied 4 human colonies and were besieging 2 more. In the command center on Earth, Admiral Marcus Chen watched the tactical displays with an expression that revealed nothing. Around him, junior officers looked worried as reports of losses came in. But Marcus had expected this. In fact, he had planned for it. "Admiral, should we reinforce the colonies under attack?" Colonel Park asked. Marcus shook his head. "No, execute Operation Withdrawal. All colonies under threat are to evacuate their civilian populations immediately. Military forces will conduct fighting retreats, but they are not to defend fixed positions to the last man. We trade space for time." Park looked confused. "Sir, the colonists won't understand. They'll think we're abandoning them." They'll be alive to complain about it, Marcus replied. Explain the strategy to them. We can rebuild colonies. We can't bring back the dead. The Zethkar want to conquer human worlds? Fine, let them. But they won't find what they expect. The order went out and human colonies began evacuating. Civilians were loaded onto transport ships and evacuated to safer systems. Military forces, instead of defending to the death, conducted strategic withdrawals. They fought only to delay the enemy, to buy time for evacuations, and then they retreated. To the Zethkar, it looked like victory. To Marcus Chen, it was all going according to plan. The Zethkar occupied the human colonies and expected to find infrastructure they could use, resources they could exploit, and populations they could control. What they found instead were ghost towns. Every factory had been stripped of critical components. Every power plant had been sabotaged. Computer systems had been wiped clean. The colonies were intact but useless. Worse, the human military forces that retreated hadn't disappeared. They had gone underground, literally. On each occupied world, networks of resistance fighters remained behind. They hid in wilderness areas, in underground bunkers, and in abandoned mining tunnels. They struck at Zethkar supply lines, ambushed patrols, and generally made occupation a nightmare. On the colony world of New Texas, a Zethkar garrison commander learned about human guerrilla warfare the hard way. His forces controlled all the major settlements, but they couldn't secure the vast stretches of territory between them. Convoys traveling between bases were attacked regularly. Supply depots exploded mysteriously. Zethkar soldiers who ventured outside fortified areas often didn't come back. The garrison commander increased patrols and security, but it didn't help. The humans seemed to know exactly where his forces would be and when. They struck at weak points, inflicted casualties, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. After 3 months of occupation, the garrison had suffered more losses than they had during the initial invasion. The pattern repeated across all occupied worlds. The Zethkar won battles and took territory, but they couldn't pacify the populations. More troubling, they couldn't eliminate the human military forces. Those forces were always retreating, always pulling back, but never actually defeated. Kirathon compiled reports from occupied colonies and presented them to the High Council. The news was not what they wanted to hear. The hegemony was bleeding resources at an alarming rate. Maintaining occupation forces on 6 human worlds required enormous amounts of supplies and reinforcements. The guerrilla attacks were causing steady losses. Meanwhile, intelligence reports suggested that humanity's industrial capacity was actually increasing, not decreasing. How is this possible? High Counselor Vextharn demanded. We occupy their colonies. We control their territory. Why are they getting stronger? Kirathon pulled up data showing the human economy. Because they planned for this, Counselor. Earth's industrial capacity is vast. The colonies we occupy were never their primary manufacturing centers. Those are located in heavily fortified systems we haven't attacked. Moreover, humans have converted their entire economy to war production. Every shipyard, every factory, every resource extraction operation is now focused on building weapons and warships. She showed them production figures that made the council members shift uncomfortably. In the 6 months since the war began, humanity had built over 400 new warships. That was more than they had destroyed. Human military strength was growing, not shrinking. And there's something else, Kirathon continued. Our captured soldiers report that their human captors treat them well. They provide medical care, adequate food, and even allow communication with families. This follows something humans call the Geneva Conventions, rules of warfare they developed centuries ago. But when we capture human soldiers, they don't break. They resist interrogation. Some have even escaped and rejoined their forces. The humans we're fighting are not like any enemy we've faced before. The High Council refused to acknowledge the implications. They had committed too much to this war to consider retreat. Instead, they ordered more attacks, more invasions, more attempts to break human resistance through force. Every attempt met the same response: evacuations, retreats, and guerrilla warfare. Meanwhile, Admiral Marcus Chen prepared for the next phase of his plan. For 6 months, humanity had been on the defensive, trading space for time, bleeding the Zethkar forces slowly while building up their own military might. Now it was time to go on the offensive. Operation Hammerfall was the largest military operation in human history. 800 human warships organized into 4 fleet groups, prepared to strike into Zethkar territory. Their targets weren't colonies or civilian centers. They were supply depots, shipyards, and staging areas. The goal was to cut off the Zethkar forces occupying human worlds and destroy their ability to reinforce and resupply those forces. The operation began with surgical precision. Human fleets jumped into Zethkar systems, struck their targets with overwhelming force, and jumped back out before reinforcements could arrive. It was hit-and-run warfare on a massive scale. The Zethkar, who had their forces spread across occupied human territory, couldn't respond effectively to threats appearing across their own space. Within 2 weeks, the Zethkar had lost 15 major supply depots and 3 shipyards. Their forces occupying human colonies suddenly found themselves cut off from resupply. Ammunition ran low. Replacement parts became scarce. Food and medical supplies had to be rationed. On New Texas, the garrison commander received orders to hold his position at all costs. He looked at his supply reports and knew it was impossible. His forces were already running low on everything. The human resistance attacks were increasing in frequency and sophistication. Now, without resupply, his situation was becoming desperate. A week later, a human fleet appeared in orbit above New Texas. The garrison commander expected an attack. Instead, he received a transmission from Admiral Marcus Chen. The message was simple and direct. Surrender now, and you and your forces will be treated as prisoners of war under human conventions. You will be fed, housed, and given medical care. You will be allowed to communicate with your families. After the war ends, you will be repatriated. Refuse to surrender, and my Marines will take the planet by force. Your choice. The garrison commander looked at his officers. They had been soldiers long enough to recognize an impossible situation. They surrendered. So did 4 other Zethkar garrisons over the next month. 2 chose to fight and were defeated in brutal ground campaigns that showed the Zethkar just how effective human soldiers were at infantry combat. The war had been going on for 8 months. The Zethkar had started with overwhelming numerical superiority. Now they were losing ground, losing supplies, and losing ships at a rate they couldn't sustain. Their economy was straining under the demands of total war. The occupied colonies were costing them more than they were worth. And human forces, far from being defeated, were getting stronger and more aggressive. In the Zethkar High Council chamber, the arguments grew heated. Some council members wanted to negotiate for peace. Others insisted that surrender was unthinkable, that the hegemony's honor demanded victory. While they argued, Admiral Marcus Chen was preparing the final move of his strategy, one that would force the Zethkar to make a decision they had never imagined having to make. The capital ship Eisenhower dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zethkar Prime system, and within minutes, 799 other human warships joined it. They arranged themselves in a massive formation that stretched across thousands of kilometers of space. It was the largest single fleet ever assembled by humanity, and they hung there in the darkness, their weapon systems powered up but not firing. On the planet below, alarms shrieked across every military installation. The Zethkar homeworld, which had not been threatened in over 2 centuries, suddenly found itself facing an enemy fleet in orbit. Panic spread through the planetary defense forces. Their own fleets were scattered across occupied human territory or destroyed in previous battles. Only 200 warships remained for home defense, and they were hopelessly outnumbered. High Counselor Vex Tharn stared at the tactical display in the emergency command bunker deep beneath the capital city. 800 human ships, in orbit, around his homeworld. He felt something he had never experienced before, genuine fear. Not for himself, but for his entire civilization. Can our planetary shields withstand their attack? He asked the defense coordinator. The coordinator's 3 eyes showed doubt. Against energy weapons, yes. But the humans primarily use kinetic weapons, mass accelerated to extreme velocities. Our shields are designed to dissipate energy, not stop physical projectiles traveling at near light speed. If they bombard us, the shields will fail quickly. Before Vex Tharn could respond, every communication system in the bunker activated simultaneously. The human fleet was broadcasting on all channels, military and civilian. Admiral Marcus Chen's face appeared on screens throughout the Zethkar homeworld. This is Fleet Admiral Marcus Chen of the United Earth Space Command. I am addressing the Zethkar High Council and the people of Zethkar Prime. 8 months ago, your forces scanned one of our ships without permission. When we protested this violation, you attacked us. When we demanded an apology, you insulted us and declared war. You invaded our colonies expecting easy conquest. You thought we were weak, primitive, and easily defeated? Marcus paused, letting his words sink in. You were wrong. We are not weak, we are not primitive, and we have never been easily defeated. Your forces currently occupy 6 human colonies. Those colonies are now cut off from resupply. Your garrisons have been given the opportunity to surrender with honor. Many have accepted. Those who refused have been defeated. Your fleets have been scattered or destroyed. Your economy is collapsing under the strain of a war you started but cannot win. The image shifted to show the human fleet in orbit, hundreds of warships bristling with weapons. We are here to offer you one chance, one opportunity to end this war without further bloodshed. Surrender unconditionally. Withdraw all your forces from human territory. Pay reparations for the damage you have caused. Agree to a peace treaty with strict terms. Do this and your homeworld will not be harmed. Your people will live. Your civilization will continue, though it will be diminished. Marcus's expression hardened. Refuse this offer, and we will show you what total war truly means. We will show you what happens when you provoke a species that has been at war with itself for 10,000 years. We will show you why humanity survived every catastrophe, every conflict, every near-extinction event that should have destroyed us. We have destroyed our own cities when necessary. We have sacrificed millions of our own people to win wars. Do not think for one moment that we will hesitate to do what is necessary. The transmission paused. You have 1 hour to decide. Choose wisely. The screen went dark. In the emergency bunker, the High Council members looked at each other with expressions ranging from shock to horror to stubborn pride. High Counselor Vextharn knew they had to decide quickly. They are bluffing, Counselor Mexaveris insisted. They will not commit genocide. Civilized species do not destroy entire planets. It is unthinkable. Kirathon, who had been called to the bunker as their expert on humanity, spoke up. With respect, Counselor, I must disagree. I have studied human history extensively. They are not bluffing. Humans have a concept they call mutually assured destruction. During their Cold War period, they built enough nuclear weapons to destroy their own planet multiple times over. They stood at the brink of extinction and did not back down. They have destroyed their own cities when those cities were occupied by enemies. They have sacrificed everything repeatedly to win wars. She pulled up images on the display showing scenes from human history, cities reduced to rubble, massive explosions, landscapes scarred by weapons of terrible power. This species nearly destroyed itself multiple times and kept fighting. They have no concept of surrender when they believe their cause is just. Admiral Chen is not making an empty threat. If we refuse, they will follow through. But our planetary shields, Mexaveris began, will not stop kinetic bombardment. Kirathon interrupted. They have 800 ships up there. Each one carries railguns that can accelerate projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. Our shields will fail within minutes under sustained bombardment. High Counselor Vextharn closed his eyes. He thought about the path that had led them here. The arrogant decision to scan a human ship. The casual attack that followed. The assumption that this new species would be easy to intimidate. Every decision made from a position of superiority and contempt. Now they face the consequences. Perhaps we should call their bluff, Mexaveris suggested. Order our defense fleet to engage them. Show them we will not surrender our homeworld without a fight. Vextharn opened his eyes. And then, even if by some miracle we defeat their fleet, humanity still exists. Earth still exists. Their industrial capacity still exists. They will build more ships and come back. And next time they will not offer terms. They will simply attack. He looked around at his fellow council members. We started this war through arrogance and stupidity. We have lost. The only question now is whether we accept defeat or die in pride. The High Council does not surrender, Mexaveris shouted. Our ancestors conquered 50 worlds. We do not bow to primitives. Those primitives have 800 warships in orbit around our homeworld. Vextharn replied coldly. They have defeated every fleet we sent against them. They have occupied our occupied colonies. They have achieved strategic victory. Continuing to fight now is not courage. It is suicide. The argument continued for 40 minutes. Finally, Vextharn called for a vote. The decision was not unanimous, but it was decisive. The Zethkar hegemony would surrender. Before they could transmit their decision, a message came from the human fleet. To demonstrate our capabilities and our resolve, we will now provide a demonstration. We have selected an uninhabited moon in your system. Watch closely. On the Eisenhower, Admiral Marcus Chen gave the order. A single destroyer, the MacArthur, broke formation and moved into firing position. It aimed at a barren moon orbiting the system's outer planet. The moon was roughly 800 kilometers in diameter, a lifeless ball of rock and ice that had no strategic value whatsoever. The MacArthur's main railgun charged. It was an experimental weapon, one that the Zethkar scan 8 months ago had never detected. The weapon fired a single projectile, a tungsten rod 20 meters long and 2 meters in diameter, accelerated to 12% the speed of light. The projectile crossed the distance to the moon in seconds. When it struck, the kinetic energy released was equivalent to multiple nuclear weapons. The impact crater was visible from the planet, a bright flash of light followed by debris ejecting into space. The explosion was so powerful that it started a chain reaction in the moon's interior. Within minutes, massive cracks appeared across the moon's surface. That was one projectile from one destroyer. Admiral Chen's voice came over the communication channel. We have 800 ships. Many of them are far more powerful than the MacArthur. Your planetary shields cannot stop weapons like this. We can do to your cities what we just did to that moon. We do not want to. We came here to end a war, not to commit genocide. But make no mistake about our capability or our will. In the emergency bunker, even the hardline council members fell silent. They had just watched a moon being destroyed by a single shot. The demonstration was clear and terrifying. These humans possessed weapons that could devastate planets, and they had the will to use them if necessary. High Counselor Vexitharn opened a communication channel to the human fleet. Admiral Chen, this is High Counselor Vexitharn of the Zethkar hegemony. We accept your terms. We surrender unconditionally. The negotiations began immediately and lasted 3 days. The terms were harsh but not cruel. The Zethkar would withdraw all forces from human territory immediately. They would pay reparations for destroyed property and lost lives. They would reduce their military to defensive levels only. A demilitarized zone would be established between human and Zethkar space. Most significantly, the Zethkar would broadcast a formal apology across all known civilizations, acknowledging their unprovoked aggression and humanity's right to defend itself. Kirathon was appointed as the first Zethkar ambassador to Earth, a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. High Counselor Vextharn explained his reasoning. You were the only one who understood what we were facing. You tried to warn us. You understood humans when we did not. That makes you the best qualified to represent us going forward. 3 weeks later, Kirathon stood in the embassy on Earth, looking out at the planet that had produced such a formidable species. She had spent the past days reading more about human history and culture, trying to understand them better. What struck her most was their complexity. They could be compassionate and brutal, merciful and ruthless, peaceful and warlike. They were contradictions that somehow worked. Captain Elena Vasquez visited her at the embassy, now promoted to Commodore after her role in the war. They sat in the ambassador's office drinking tea that Kirathon found surprisingly pleasant. Ambassador, may I ask you a question? Elena said. Why did your people attack us? Was it really just arrogance? Kirathon considered her answer carefully. Partly arrogance, yes, but also ignorance. We scanned your ship and thought we understood your technology. We saw kinetic weapons and chemical propulsion and assumed you were primitive. We did not understand that humans deliberately design their ships to appear less threatening than they are. We did not know your history of warfare. We judged you based on incomplete information and paid a terrible price for our mistake. Elena nodded slowly. We don't want to be warlike, you know. Most humans would prefer peace, but we've learned hard lessons over thousands of years. We prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. We build weapons we hope never to use. We train for wars we hope never to fight. And yet, when war comes, you prosecute it with terrifying efficiency, Kirathon observed. Because if we're going to fight, we fight to win, Elena replied. We don't do half measures in warfare. It's one of our worst and best qualities. She smiled slightly. I hope your people have learned from this experience. We didn't want this war. You forced it on us. But now that it's over, we're willing to work toward peaceful coexistence. That's another thing about humans. We're very good at becoming friends with former enemies. Kirathon raised her cup in a gesture she had learned was a human toast. Then let us work toward friendship, Commodore. The galaxy is large enough for both our species. Across the galaxy, the other civilizations watched and learned. The species they had dismissed as newcomers had fought a major empire to a standstill and forced their surrender. The lesson was clear. Humanity was not to be underestimated, not to be provoked, and definitely not to be judged by appearances alone. In the years that followed, other species would try to test humanity, to probe for weaknesses, to see if the war with the Zethkar had been luck or skill. They would learn, as the Zethkar had learned, that humanity's greatest strength was not their technology or their tactics. It was their refusal to give up, their ability to adapt, and their willingness to do whatever was necessary to survive and protect their own. The Zethkar had scanned a human warship and thought they understood what they saw. They had provoked humanity expecting easy victory. It had been a big mistake, one that changed the balance of power in the galaxy forever. And it all started because someone had underestimated the species that had climbed from caves to stars in 10,000 years, surviving every disaster along the way. Humanity had arrived in the galaxy, and everyone now knew it.